Welcome in. Professor Zeep here, and we're going to do a little lecture here on the Big-5 personality traits. So just to kind of, once again, give you the foundation here is that, remember, traits are these consistent, long-lasting tendencies in behavior, and certain psychologists believe that we can actually measure these in people by giving them these self-report paper and pencil type measures. And so basically, to make a long story short, they've narrowed down all the personality traits out there into a core 5, and they believe that these 5 basically can encapsulate what personality is, and these traits are completely independent of each other. In other words, they don't correlate with each other, and therefore they're probably measuring 5 different things. So we're going to look at the big 5 personality traits there. All right, so let's start off with our first one, which is called neuroticism. So the way to describe this, it's the tendency to experience unpleasant emotions relatively easily. Another way to think about this one, we would call it emotional instability. So what we found with these particular individuals is that they tend to be a little bit on the anxious side, so prone to anxiety. They may worry a lot. They're prone to depression, for example. So in other words, we find that they're those kind of people that are easily stressed out by things, especially by conflict with other people. And we've also discovered that, looking at the research, that they may not be as effective with dealing with stress compared to, say, some other personality types. So neuroticism, once again, kind of means you're emotionally unstable, where if you scored low in this trait, remember these are completely measurable and people vary in the severity of them, we would say that you're emotionally stable. So in other words, people who are level-headed, not affected by stress, not depressed, that kind of thing, we would say you're low on neuroticism. Our next trait is called extroversion. In other words, our social butterflies. So our definition here, it's the tendency to seek stimulation and to enjoy the company of other people. These people are generally described as being warm, a little bit on the impulsive, assertive side. In other words, they're the go-getters, if you would. They may even have a need for excitement. So the research shows that quite possibly they could be risk takers. So we know through the research it's correlated with alcohol abuse. It may have similar problems. So I guess the point is they may seek artificial ways to stimulate themselves because they love to be stimulated. They are generally happy most of the time, where we said the neurotic is sort of worrying and possibly depressed. So in other words, this is the type of person where, you're standing in line next to them at the grocery store and they will talk your ear off. They're very friendly, very willing to tell you things. So in other words, just really talkative, seeking stimulation type person. Another research finding found that, I thought this was interesting, that they're more likely to listen to loud music in their car. Those kind of people, like you're sitting at the red light and their music's booming, they're not afraid to show it. And the study also mentioned that they're more likely to get in a car accident as a result of that. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So if you're scoring high in this trait, we would call you an extrovert. If you score low in this one, well, then we would call you an introvert, which basically means that you like quiet activities, you like to be by yourself, you're not as willing to seek stimulation as the extrovert would. So it turns out these two traits here, neuroticism and extroversion, tend to be some of our strongest in terms of genetics. So we found that these two potentially are something that possibly you could inherit from your parents. So compared to the other 3, these two seem to be the most genetically tied. Our third trait is called agreeableness, which is basically the tendency to be compassionate towards other people. In other words, the way I think of this one, it's a bit of a humanitarian type person where they care about other people in terms of their welfare. These are people that generally trust other people and expect others to trust them, so they're very willing to do that. Research also shows that they favor negotiation over debating. So in other words, they would rather agree than to disagree, as the name sort of implies. So in other words, I think these are individuals that just kind of are really caring type individual, and they like things to go smoothly without conflict and would rather agree. Our fourth one is called conscientiousness, which is quite a word there. So conscientiousness is the tendency to show self-discipline, to be dutiful, and to strive for achievement and competence. In other words, these are very disciplined people who often get things done. So for example, the research shows they have a very strong work motivation. You know, when I have students who fit this sort of description, these are the ones that are always on time, always turning in their assignments on time. You know, they're just really conscious of what they do, basically. We also have found through research that they're more likely to exercise, more likely to eat healthy, and to avoid excessive alcohol, tobacco, and risky sexual practices, which makes sense because if you're sort of self-aware and you're disciplined, you would probably avoid things that are bad for you. So these individuals, once again, seem to be very motivated and very self-conscious about their own behavior. Our last one here, which is probably the weakest of the bunch, according to the research, is called Openness to Experience. So an easy way to kind of explain that, tendency to enjoy new intellectual experiences and new ideas. By the way, this is probably the hardest one to observe of all of them. So as the name implies, they're very open to new things. You know, these are people that like to experiment and are not necessarily mainstream. You know, for example, I'm a musician. I identify with music a lot. So use that as an example. This is not your top 40 kind of person. In other words, these are people that like, you know, sort of outside the box type music or the deeper tracks, if you know what I mean. So in other words, they're more willing to explore new ideas. That could include things like modern art or unusual music, as we said, or even thought-provoking plays and films. So the way I kind of look at them is they're very unique. They love to try new things, you know, kind of like an artsy-fartsy kind of person who's just really unique and intellectual, possibly. We know that kind of fits that description. All right, so there's our big five. Please email me if you have any questions, guys. This will conclude our short lecture, and we'll see you online.